What is going on, Chess YouTube? So in today's video, we are looking at round number 10 of the ongoing World Chess Championship match between Ding Liren of China, the defending world champion, and Gukesh D of India, the challenger. And here we go. In the game, Ding Liren is playing as white. Now, so far in this match, he's played literally every opening you can play: e4, d4, knight f3, and c4. In today's game, he does go 1 d4. That is his favorite move as white, and now Gukesh goes knight f6, the Indian defense. Now we have knight f3 and d5, and now, of course, the main line for white is c4, but so far in this match, Ding Liren has been avoiding the main lines as white, and he continues this trend. I mean, he did it in the last World Championship match against Jan Nepomniachtchi, and in this game, he does go bishop f4, the London system. Now, he's already played the London system once as white in this match so far, so maybe he'll have a different idea in this game. Now here, Gukesh, he goes for the same line he played earlier in this match. That is the one starting with e6, intending a very fast c5 break. Now we have e3 and sure enough c5, and now Ding Liren is going to have a choice. Now, the main line, if you're trying to fight for an advantage as white, is knight b d2. From there, the main line for black goes queen b6. White has to defend the pawn, perhaps rook b1. That is the strongest move. And from there, Gukesh would likely go bishop d6 or something similar. That is one of the strongest lines as black against the London system. If you want to look for a good line as black, I mean, this is as good as it gets. Gukesh even played this line in the candidates tournament earlier this year against Alireza Firouzja. Now, instead of knight bd2, in this position, Ding Liren does go bishop e2. This is an interesting sideline. Of course, earlier in the match, he did go c3. That's another sideline here. And how is Gukesh going to respond? Well, the strongest move after bishop e2 is still queen to b6, putting pressure on that pawn on b2. Of course, that pawn is undefended as the bishop is out onto the f4 square instead of being on c1. That is largely the idea behind this e6, d5, c5 setup. You get your queen out to b6 very early and pressure that pawn in a lot of different lines. Now, here, instead of that move, Gukesh, in this position, he does just go bishop d6. And I gotta say, this move is a little bit inaccurate. I'm not sure if Gukesh was worried about some line after queen to b6, or if he was worried about Ding Liren having some sort of preparation against this line specifically. I'm not really sure what the problem was, but bishop d6 overall is a very weak move, and here Ding plays just the strongest move. That is d takes c5. Now, here, Gukesh shockingly has a wide range of options. You can take on c5 with the bishop. Bishop takes c5 is playable. You can also go bishop takes f4, trading bishops. And beyond that, you can even go queen to a5, hitting the king on e1, and then pick up the pawn on the c5 square. Now, in the game here, Gukesh, he does take on c5 with the bishop. Bishop takes c5. That is perfectly fine. However, if he was in a more enterprising mood, bishop takes f4 would imbalance the game quite a bit. Yes, white would have double pawns on the f-file. Yes, they do optically look a little bit weak, but white would have a lot of pressure on the semi-open d and e files. For example, it could go short castles, rook to e1, knight e5, and so on, and that knight would be sitting very pretty on the e5 square. So, despite having those double pawns, they aren't that weak in that kind of position, but instead, bishop takes c5 played in the game. Now here, Ding, c4, expanding on the queen side, a very typical, queen's pawn opening move, and now we are reaching a position that resembles the traditional queen's gambit decline. There is that line in the queen's gambit decline, the three knights variation, where black goes 4, bishop e7, white goes bishop f4, then e3. This is rapidly resembling that kind of position. Now here, Gukesh has got a wide range of options. He can go d takes c4 with the idea of trading queens immediately. That would be a more boring option. Beyond that, knight bd7, knight c6, and short castles are also playable. Now, in the game, he does short castles on the board, and then short castles for Ding as well. Now here, according to the computer, the move d takes c4 is the most accurate continuation here for white, likely with the idea of trading off those queens as quickly as you can. Now instead, Gukesh, again, he's likely playing for potentially a win, not necessarily a win out of the opening, but he wants to get, sort of a combative position, and he does go knight to c6. Now here, Ding, knight c3. And only now, after the knights are developed out onto the board, he does trade on c4. So, d takes c4. Now, of course, Ding Liren has the option of trading queens immediately. He does not do that. Interestingly, he just goes bishop takes c4. Now, again, Gukesh, he's got the option. Do you want to trade queens? Do you want to go queen d7, avoiding the queen trade, intending rook d8? White would likely go queen c2, maybe rook a d1, and so on. And very importantly, overall, in this position, white does have a very, very small advantage. The entire position is pretty much symmetrical. The only difference, literally the only difference here, is white's bishop, instead of being on the c1 square, it's out here on f4, outside the pawn chain. I mean, imagine black could go bishop f5 in one move right here. Then we'd have literally a symmetrical position. And that small difference with the different placement of these bishops does have a very big impact on the direction of the game. Now here, Gukesh, again, queen takes d1 and queen d7 are playable, but instead he goes knight to h5, putting immediate pressure on that bishop. Now, of course, that bishop is going to be lost sooner or later. For example, if you go to g3 or e5, either knight could take the bishop, and there really aren't any other squares. And if you leave it on f4, then knight takes f4 sooner or later will win that bishop. Now, here in the game, what are his options? You can go bishop g5, bishop e5, bishop g3. You can also go for moves like knight e4 or queen to c2, avoiding the queen trade. In the game, Ding Liren does go bishop g5, putting pressure on that queen right away. Now, of course, queen takes d1 is one option. For example, you could do that, then go h6, bishop h4, g5, bishop g3, and then win the bishop. Instead, in the game, Gukesh, he's playing very solid so far in this game. He just goes bishop e7, retreating the bishop, a perfectly fine move. Again, he's playing as black. He's a little bit worse thanks to the worst placement of that bishop on c8. So he is just trying to equalize so far. Now, again, Ding Liren has the option of trading queens, and again, he declines. Knight to e4 is the move in this position, jumping in with the knight and defending the bishop on g5 with the knight. Now, if bishop takes, white can go knight takes g5, maybe followed by queen to c2, and he would have a lot of pressure on that pawn on h7, so Ding Liren is finding some subtle ideas here. All right, Gukesh, knight to f6, retreating the knight, and now the strongest moves for white in this position, if Ding Liren wants to play for a win, if he wants to play ambitiously, is either queen c2, that is the most logical, but the computer also says queen to b1 is almost as good. So overall, queen c2, followed by perhaps rook fd1 or rook ad1 would be the idea. And again, you do have a little bit of pressure on this diagonal, potentially putting pressure on that pawn on h7, for example. Bishop takes, then knight g5, and so on in the future, maybe h4, could be some ideas. Now, instead, here, Ding Liren, he does bail out to an endgame where he has a tiny microscopic advantage. He goes knight takes f6, trading the knights, then bishop takes, then he trades the queens. Queen takes d8. Now, the idea is if you take with the bishop, that bishop would be relatively passively placed. Therefore, instead, rook takes d8 was the move here by Gukesh. And now Ding does damage Gukesh D's pawn structure on the king side. Bishop takes and g takes. Now, it's very important here to slow down a tough strategy. If literally all the pieces were wiped off the board, let's say all the rooks and all the minor pieces were gone, white would potentially have a winning endgame. Here's how you would win the endgame as white. You go basically g3, king g2, king f3, and you march your king all the way up to the h6 square, putting pressure on that h7 pawn. If you were to get some kind of scenario like that with the king still on g8, for example, then you can start advancing your king side pawns, trying to create something on the king side. So that is the scenario where in a king and pawn endgame, white may actually be winning. But of course, we are a very, very long ways off from having a king and pawn endgame. The rooks are still on the board, and that's going to give Gukesh D excellent drawing chances. Now, we have rook fd1, centralizing the rook, then bishop d7, rook ac1, and here, Gukesh, his big problem, once again, is that light-squared bishop that is very often the problem piece in the queen's game with decline. After all, black does go e6 and then d5 very early in the game. That does lock in the bishop. Therefore, he's got to find some way to untangle. What's it going to be? Do you want to go, for example, knight a5 or knight b8, then bishop c6 as one idea? However, instead, in the game, Gukesh goes for an idea I like a little bit more. That is bishop to e8. Now, the rooks stay connected, and Gukesh has the option of trading rooks, say rook takes d1, rook d8, and so on, getting the rooks off the board. And the bishop, again, it is relatively passive on the e8 square, but for now, it's kind of okay. He's got to untangle somehow. Now, here, Ding Liren, he does trade on d8. Rook takes d8, then rook takes, and now king to f1, sliding his king over, likely intending king e2, or something similar next. Now, Gukesh, king g7, trying to march his king down the board. His idea may be f5, then king to f6, and the king would be decently placed on the f6 square. Not a bad square for the king. All right, Ding Liren, a3, gaining control of the b4 square, stopping knight b4 ideas, potentially intending b4, gaining more space on the queen side. That could be one idea, certainly an option. All right, Gukesh, f5, as promised, intending king to f6 on the next move. Now we have king to e1 for Ding Liren, king to f6, and now here, Ding, he just retreats his bishop, bishop b2. This is a very curious move. I guess his idea was to get out of the way of a future a5 and knight a5 advance, or even an a6 and b5 advance. However, the bishop, it's not really doing a whole lot on e2. I mean, yes, technically you are opening up pressure on the knight with the rook, but Ding Liren is kind of playing passively so far, and I gotta say, I'm not super impressed by Ding Liren's opening preparation and overall strategy in this game. I was hoping he would press a lot more, and so far he's not really doing that, but let's see how this endgame plays out. Here we have knight e7 for Gukesh, rerouting the knight, potentially intending something like knight e5, bishop c6, and so on. Those would be decent placements for those minor pieces, so Gukesh finding a pretty solid way to regroup. All right, Ding Liren, g3, gaining space on the king side, and we have rook c8, offering the rook trade, and here Ding Liren does go for it. We have rook takes and then knight takes, and now again, Gukesh has two problems. One is the slightly weakened kingside pawn structure. That won't be that big of a problem if his king is well centralized, and so far it is. Beyond that, he's also got to find a way to get his minor piece into the game, especially that light squared bishop, but he should be able to accomplish that task. Now we have knight to d2, knight d6, jumping in with the knight, and now Ding Liren offers the knight trade, knight c4, and Gukesh, he does go for it. We have knight takes, then bishop takes, and now bishop c6, lining up the bishop on this long diagonal. Now here, Ding Liren, f4, gaining space on the king side, trying to block out the king. Now the e5 advance would not be a good idea. After e5, f takes, king takes, then the pawn on f7 would hang. Therefore, these pawns on the king side are relatively fixed for the near future. All right, Gukesh, b6. Very good, getting those pawns on dark squares. Whenever you have a light square bishop endgame, you want as many of your pawns on dark squares as humanly possible. Now we have king d2, king to e7, Gukesh trying to centralize his king, then king c3, and king d6. So Gukesh in a very good position to basically block any advances by Ding Liren in this endgame. Now we have b4, gaining space, while also keeping those pawns on dark squares where the bishop cannot attack them. Very good. And now f6 for Gukesh. Now, that is a somewhat committal move. Of course, the e6 pawn is no longer defended by the pawn on f7. That means bishop takes e6 ideas will be possible. However, Gukesh will have the option of going e5 at some point in the future, trying to gain space, maybe trying to make something happen in the center. All right, Ding Liren, king d4. Then we have h6, bishop b3, bishop b7, and now in this position, both sides effectively just bail out for a draw. We have bishop c4, bishop c6, bishop b3, bishop b7, bishop c4, and bishop c6. And this is the third time both sides have reached this exact position. According to the rules of chess, that is a draw by threefold repetition. Threefold repetition referring to the third time achieving this position. And the reason that rule is there is if that rule didn't exist, both sides would literally go back and forth forever, not accomplishing anything. So for that reason, that rule is quite useful. So overall, Ding Liren, he got a small advantage out of the opening with his London system. However, Gukesh, he defended just fine, and Ding Liren, I gotta say, I wasn't that impressed with his play in this game. The real shocker for me was starting with the move 13, knight takes f6 here, going for basically an equal endgame essentially. Knight takes, bishop takes, queen takes, rook takes, then bishop takes and g takes. And overall, this endgame really doesn't give white that much to play for. Yes, he's a microscopic advantage to the better pawn structure and the better minor piece, that being the bishop. But overall, there's just not that much here to play for. I'm not sure if Ding Liren is hoping for the tie breaks. Is that his strategy, trying to wait till the tie breaks happen and then trying to outplay Gukesh in shorter time controls? I'm not really sure. I mean, it really does feel like Gukesh is matched to win here. He's going to have two more chances as white, and he'll likely draw as black with the way Ding Liren is playing, but those two games as white for Gukesh, those will be the real games to watch. It'll be interesting to see if Gukesh can pull out a win in those and to see what else he comes up with, because his opening preparation as white has been, pretty solid so far in this match, but we'll have to wait and see. Alright, Chess YouTube, I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, smash that like button and check out this video right here, where Gukesh and Magnus Carlsen battle it out in the 2022 Speed Chess Championships. That game was, a lot of fun. There was a twist ending, a lot of plot twists in that game. If you want to see an exciting Gukesh versus Magnus game, I highly recommend checking that one out, and I'll see you in the next video.